we are done with all of our definitional stuff, right? That's why we did the worksheet. We defined all those things. Now you know how to calculate them. Maybe by calculating them, you understood the definitions more, became something real to you. So, now we're switching to starting to talk about economies. Now, the number one fact about economic growth is God didn't construct the earth or nature, whatever you believe, and put factories here so these people could have lots of goods and not put any factories here, right? When the world started out, what was true about human beings?
They were hunter-gatherers.
Everyone started out poor. Now, of course, you might be like me, although my relatives, well, I guess they were okay. But you might be like me, bemoaning the fact that in 1800, my relatives all didn't head out to Malibu and claim all the land. Right? Nobody wanted Malibu then, right? People weren't going to the beach, right? Your relatives. I didn't have any relatives in Alabama, but right, anybody that's from Alabama, right, what could your relatives have done? Gone down to Orange Beach and acquired it all, essentially. But they didn't. You know, different land has different values at different times. There was this, anybody's seen this, I guess probably not very politically correct comedian Sam Kennesaw online. Anybody watch him online? One of his sticks was about people in certain poor countries. He wanted to go say to them, "You live in the desert. You can't grow food there." So I mean, there are places that are you know, you might want to counteract my argument that everybody started out poor by saying that there's better land some places than others, and there is, but of course, where could you live back then when people were hunter-gatherers at the start?
Typically near water sources.
Well, that's where people chose to live, but you could live anywhere, right? Your relatives could have gone to Malibu. In the United States, it was literally true. I mean, you could go anywhere you were strong enough to defend where you lived. Right? You could live wherever you wanted. So everyone started out poor. There is a large variance in per capita GDP today. So there are countries that are relatively rich and countries that are relatively poor. In your own life, if you want to do something, what do you generally do? Either implicitly or even explicitly. you wanted to become an actor or an actress, what would you do?
Study acting.
Yeah, move to LA or New York. See what other people who had been successful did, and you'll find that they all went to various acting workshops and studied acting in various situations. In fact, some college students who really, really, really want to be in movie making, what do? Try to go to Southern Cal, right? That's probably the best place to go if you want to. So sort of implicitly, what can countries do? Say, well, these guys are successful, these guys aren't successful, which countries do you want to mimic? You know, you want to mimic the successful ones. Now, of course, there are limits to this, right? I want to be a basketball player. Well, I will mimic, I'll mimic what Shaquille O'Neal did. Why doesn't that work for me?
Not quite so, so.
I'm not as big as Shaquille O'Neal, right? If you're a country, you can look around and say, well, there are all these Western countries and Asian countries that are rich, but maybe I'll mimic Saudi Arabia and do what they did to be rich. Well, what's the problem?
They're not the same resources.
Yeah, you can't make oil show up underneath, certainly in that amount, show up underneath your soil, right? You can't discover oil just because you want to. But you can build factories just because you want to. You can encourage, you can encourage more tools in your country and things like so. There are things that you can do to mimic what some countries have done. If you're not the Ukraine, Canada, the US, Argentina, what are those countries? But do you know what they have in common? Not oil. Well, they do have some oil. Everybody has some oil. What do they have? They're the breadbasket countries. They're the countries where you can grow lots of grain. I was going to throw in China, but they have big sections of arable land too, but I think they grow a lot of rice.
Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe.
Ukraine produces all this, a lot of hunger. There was a lot of worry that this war was going to cause a lot of hunger in Africa. Because not just the breadbasket of Europe, but it's also easy to ship grain to Africa from the Ukraine. Europe's pretty rich and has well-developed infrastructure. They can get it elsewhere. It's not as clear what was going to happen with Africa. So, there's a large variance. By the way, what does variance mean? How many people have taken the stat class? Large disparity, there's differences. There's something called the Rule of 72. Or the Rule of 70. And the Rule of 70 essentially is a growth rate divided into $70-ish gives the number of years to double. So if you take 70 and you divide it by your growth rate is 2, then 35 years to double. And the importance of this is it shows you how important differences in growth rates are. Let's say let's round the, well, let's just use 100,000, that's an easy number. Let's say at some point, you have a kid. The average income is, well, we want to start at day zero, your kids are. The average income is 100,000 in the US. So, year zero is $100,000. So your kid starts off in a society with $100,000. Let's say the growth rate is 1%, the growth rate is 2%, the growth rate is, let's say, 4%. Let's say 5%, just to make it different. Now, it's hard to get a 5% growth rate, but just to see the differences in these. Well, this says, right, 1 divided by 70, and let me tell you about that. I said 70-ish, because any finance majors in here? Be important if you're in finance, maybe in accounting. There are different kinds of compounding. You can compound interest daily, you can compound it continuously, you can even compound it annually. But if you compound it daily, it grows faster than annual. If you compound it continuously, it grows faster than daily. But, so some people will call it the rule of 72, some people will call it the rule of, for some types of compounding, I think 76 is the number, but 70 is good enough. This is an approximation. This is a rule of thumb anyway. So, your kid is born in whatever year, whenever the U.S. income per capita is 100,000, you vote for policies that get us a 1% growth rate, which means your kid lives to about life expectancy. So at age 70, your kid dies making what? In a society where how many goods can he consume? 200,000. All right, so income is doubled. All right, when I was your age, what was I consuming? 0 cell phones. When I was in college, so your age, the video game Pong came out. Has anybody ever seen the video game Pong? So I consumed very different set of goods. You consume more now. So it'll double during your kid's lifetime. What if we have a 2% growth rate? That's not a great, 1% is not a good growth rate. 2% growth rate is sort of on the low end, 2 to 3 that we think of as a good growth rate. What happens for your kid? Well, we come down here, 2 divided into 70 is what? 35. So at age 35, or at 200,000, and at age 70, your kid, the last year of life, gets to consume about $400,000 worth of goods. This is real goods, right? This is not in terms of, inflation. We've taken all the inflation out of this. What about 5%? 5 goes into 70 how many times? 14 times. So, we get to age 14. We get to age 28. age 42, age 56, and then 70. So we come down here at age 14, we're at $200,000. Age 28, we're at $400,000. Age 42, we're at $800,000. Age 56, we're at $1,600,000. And at age 70, we're at $3,200,000. Small changes in growth rates make a huge difference. If, let's use 72. Okay? If, how many people have student loans? Nobody in here has student loans? A few people have student loans? If you have a student loan, do you pay on it now while you're in school? You can, but do you? Usually, people don't usually. Well, let's say you have a student loan with a 6% interest rate. 6 into 72 goes how many times? 12, right? That means if you fiddle around, relatively few people do this, but some people do this, and spend 12 years getting a degree, what happens to your student loans? They double. Right, if you have an 18% credit card and you never pay anything on it for 4 years, what you owe is going to about double. These growth rates really, really matter. They're really important.
Buying a house.
Right, that's why,
Yeah.
because a house is paid over 30 years, that's why the changes in interest rates make a huge difference in the mortgage on the house.
So they say make an extra payment every year too.
Well, you can cut it in half for 15 years by doing it, and yeah. I want to say that I paid $1,200 for my first house a month, and I had a 15-year mortgage.
I think
So
we paid $83.05, and in the end we'll pay, if we had paid all of the interest, $205.
Well, listen to my example. So I had a 15-year mortgage. I paid about $1,200 a month. 15 years is how many months? Well, 30 year is 360 months, right? We know that. So 15 must be 180 months. My 30-year one would have been about $1,000 a month, so I had to pay a little more. So I would have paid $360,000 to buy my then $130,000 house, whatever it was. If by paying it off in 180 months, I 360. And 180. Well, I paid $216,000 for it. So $150,000 by paying it off in 15 rather than 30. But of course, you might want a longer loan because why?
Bigger house.
You buy a bigger house and you make more with leverage. You make money with leverage. I don't want to get into too many finance courses. But yes, interest rates matter. Growth rates, an interest rate is just a growth rate. Growth rates really matter. And it matters. If you vote in economic policies that cause a 1% growth rate or a 0.5% growth rate, it's vastly different than if you vote in economic policies that cause a higher growth rate. And one of my big things in this class is you're no better, you're not a better person than the poor South Asian mother, the poor sub-Saharan African mother, who leaves her baby born with a defect to die in the bush because she's got 3 or 4 other kids to take care of. You're just richer. You can just afford to take care of, as a society, we can afford to take care of people who have limitations. So, and I guess I should put point 2 here, small differences in growth rates matter. If you want to help out the less fortunate, what had you better vote for? Policies that cause a big economy. Because a big economy allows the people to take care of the less fortunate. And I guess, let me put C in here, there are growth miracles and growth disasters. Right? South Korea, since the middle 1950s, has boomed.
North Korea has tanked.
Well, I don't know how much they tanked, they might have stayed. At one time, Haiti was a really rich country. Haiti tanked, for sure. I show a video in my global economic issues class that shows teenage soldiers in Argentina shooting live ammunition at people looting. In the 1920s, Argentina. Now the video is not completely clear on this, because you could look at the numbers in GDP per capita or GDP, but Argentina had the 6th largest economy in the world in the 1920s. Then they started voting in bad economic policies. And now their economy is what? Anybody know? Well, if you look on I think if you look just the economy as a whole, it's 35th-ish. And if you look per capita, it's like in the mid-50s, 53, something like that. And actually, if you go to Wikipedia, there are 3 different ways, 3 different groups measurements in a big table. And they'll be slightly different in each one, but they're sort of in the mid-50s versus in the mid-30s. And regardless of which measure it is, that's a far cry from 6th, right?
They're 24th by GDP.
By somebody today.
Yeah.
But still, it's a far cry from 6th.
Yeah.
And
England has fallen, the UK has fallen.
relative, yes.
Yeah.
And again, an important part to understand is that, is England poorer than it was when it was first? No, they've been passed by countries who are richer, like the
They got
US.
passed by India, is what government said.
Yes. Yeah, India's, there's some irony to that because it's a colony.
Yeah.
All right, so when we get back, we're gonna have a formal model of economic growth. But in general, we could say that there are really two ways to get economic growth. Maybe three, but one of them we don't want to count. I guess. Oh, no wonder. That should have been C. It should have been D. Growth comes from first, factors of production. Including human capital or skills. So, we want to count human capital. We want to count getting a population that's more educated. We want to count getting more tools. We're not that much interested in counting getting more people. Right? One way to get a bigger economy is getting more people, but what happens? That doesn't necessarily improve income per capita. Right? There was all this talk a year or so ago that China's economy in the next decade might pass the U.S.'s economy in size. There's less talk about that now.
Their population is decreasing,
Well, their population is decreasing.
so that's gonna affect.
China.
But,
You're talking about China.
yeah, China.
The population is aging.
Their population is aging, and they say by mid-century they might be down to, I want to say 800,000 rather than 1.3 million, I think. But so there's talk, there was talk that China was going to, economy was going to surpass the U.S. economy in size, which it certainly could. But that's not quite the same thing as per capita income. You could say, well, I guess you can say if you want, well, then China's richer than the United States, but per capita income wise, not, so maybe not. It's just a question of how that, of how you view it and what you're viewing it for.
Because like India, you're not seeing an improvement in the quality of life of their people.
What?
I said in India, you're not seeing an improvement in the quality of life.
How do I get rid of this? Damn new phones. You should never get a new phone, right?
That ringtone can be asleep.
Let me see
That
if
was
I-
soothing.
Well, that's the one that came on. Okay. Now I get rid of the volume.
Is it an iPhone?
No,
Oh, I don't know how to look that.
I have, it's a Google phone. So I got a Christmas present of a Google phone, so now it's an Android phone, but it's not the same as my Galaxies were. All right, and the other thing is you can get more tools or you can get more technology. Oh, and I didn't finish this. So we don't want to talk so much about getting more workers. We want more output per worker. But also, what's the story with land?
There's only so much of it.
Yeah, I mean, the Dutch make more of it. Maybe, I don't know. If you're an 18 or 19-year-old in here, maybe we'll make more land by producing on the moon or on Mars or something, I don't know. But barring that, I mean, all you can do is fight over land, right? And fighting isn't all that productive, right? Fighting makes us in general poor, right? What's happened to Ukraine and Russia? You even forget other people trying to put sanctions on Russia.
Lose a lot of those factors of production.
You do lose a lot of those factors of production. Although in the growth miracles, among the growth miracles was Europe after World War II. Right, there was essentially not a bridge standing in Germany. And they rebuilt, because they knew where to rebuild, they knew what they needed. But so, basically you want more human skills, you want more tools, maybe more entrepreneurs, but you really can't get growth out of more land or more people. You can't get per capita growth out of more people, you gotta improve the people. Or technology. Make your tools more productive, right? There's a big difference between how much digging you can accomplish if your shovel is a shovel versus if your shovel is a backhoe, right? And so that's where growth is going to come from. We're going to talk about that in the next class. And institutions are important. I don't know if I talked about this with the big ideas when we talked about institutions. But if you go to each continent and look at the country that's got the most per capita income, what does it tend to be? In the U.S., I mean in North America it's the U.S., and South America maybe it's an exception, but maybe Argentina. If you go to the Caribbean, maybe Jamaica. If you go to Europe, it's England or Germany maybe. If you go to Asia, India or China. But a lot of these countries, if you go to Africa, South Africa, a lot of these countries are former British colonies that ended up with the British common law system. You were in some ways lucky if you ended up being colonized by the British rather than the French. Something about the system seems to work. I may have mentioned that the first day of class or the second day of class. I also might have mentioned these islands in the Pacific where they set up deeded property on about half of them, and then the Japanese invaded in the 40s. And for whatever reason, the political will to set up the deeded property, maybe they did the most populous areas first. But anyway, the islands with the deeded property have grown much faster than the islands without it, because the institutions that are out there matter. And when you have deeded property, you have, well-defined property rights, and you could borrow against it and start businesses. And you can't borrow if your property is uncertain, because the lender can't be sure they can get the collateral.
Before World War II, India was just a bunch of princely states.
Yes, before that, yeah.
They weren't even a
Well,
full
and
country.
that's what the Franco-Prussian War was about, that Germany was not a full country. So institutions are important, and some institutions that encourage growth include, as I just said, property rights. Did I tell the story of the young economist I met from the Caribbean who was at Georgia Southern? Being a young, with a guy, he decided he would live in Savannah when he first got a job at Georgia Southern. It's not very far, maybe an hour's drive, so he bought a condo there. But pretty soon he got tired of driving, so he moved to Statesboro, I think, Georgia Southern, and rented out his condo. He said his air conditioning went out. Here, he just called up a guy to come get it. In his country, he would have had to sit out there all day and unlock the AC box for the repairmen, because they would have stolen all the metal, all the tubing off of it. That having a trusting society, having your rights being well protected are very important. And of course, as We see in major American cities where they don't want to enforce shoplifting laws, what happens?
Target and CVS move out.
People move out, they move their businesses out. Honest government.
That's a contradiction in terms.
It might be, but if the government's gonna steal your property, look. If the tax rate is 100%, how much are you gonna work? If the income tax rate is 100%, how much are you working?
No.
Zero, so, right, so the more of your money that the government takes, the less honest the government is, the more, or the less you're gonna grow economic. Historically, Jews have been persecuted by governments. Jews got around that by doing what? Anybody know? Education. You can't expropriate somebody's education. Historically, African Americans at times have been mistreated by governments.
So Frederick Douglass.
So
talked
what
about it
did,
in
what,
his book.
what did African Americans do? Mobile's sort of an exception. New Orleans was an exception, but New Orleans was, there was less overt discrimination, I think. But what did African Americans do?
Learn to read.
They learned to, but buy cars rather than property, because what's true? If you have to get out of town, you can get out of town, go live with your cousin in Detroit with your car. You can't move your house. As I said, Mobile's a little bit of an exception because there's a high African American home ownership in this county. But
Nowadays, you can move your house. Put it on the back of the same.
you can move certain houses, but still, not that easy. Not like jumping in the car and saying, these people are about to mistreat me, I'm leaving. And particularly, it wasn't until the 1930s, maybe the 1940s, that the police had radio contact, and they could radio ahead in the next town and say, stop that guy. Right? When Bonnie and Clyde were fleeing, when the Dillinger gang were fleeing, they just had to get out of town. And so, you could swear out a warrant against them, but you can't say they're in this car, right? If you try to flee now, I don't know, does the Alabama Highway Patrol contact the Mississippi or the Florida Highway Patrol if you're fleeing across state lines? They might.
If they know you're fleeing.
Yeah, they might. A dependable legal system. So if you have a dispute, you can settle it. Why is there so much violence in the drug world?
Because there's no legal system controlling it.
Yeah, unless you want to show up on Idiot Criminal of the Week, you can't call the police and say, this guy stole my stash.
It
Right.
does happen.
It does happen, and we get to read about those people. Most people in the drug business have figured out that's not a good strategy for them. So what do? They enforce it, they enforce it themselves with violence. So, a dependable legal system, and dependable, in some sense in the United States, maybe in the 30s or 20s, I don't know, maybe this is a bunch of lies and I'm just looking at old movies and things. But one thing that might have held the U.S. back is that possibly the legal system in Alabama treated people from Alabama better than they treated outsiders. The legal system in Montana treated people from Montana better than they treated outsiders. Because of course, what's true?
We also treated based on race too.
Well, they did that, but take that out of it. We talked about that. Talk about it in terms of outsiders. If you treat people inside your state better than you treat outsiders, what's gonna be true about outside companies?
They don't come.
They won't wanna do business with you. Or if they do come, of course, somebody is going to sell to people where Target left, right? But what's gonna be true? You have to put up with heavy retail theft, you're gonna charge higher prices. So, and if there are higher prices, we buy less and have less. So, a dependable legal system encourages economic growth, also political stability. Every year, your favorite team builds a roster and tries to win. Your favorite NBA team builds a different roster today than they did in 1964. Why? There's a three-point line. The rules are different. So businesses often don't really care what the rules are. They just want the rules to remain relatively the same. Right? Some of the problem Target and is it CVS, the people that are leaving the Rite Aid, the mass shoplifting areas is the rules have changed, right? When they built those outlets there, the police tried to help them stop shoplifting. If we're gonna allow shoplifting, anybody shop at the Piggly Wiggly around here? You know what the Piggly Wiggly is famous for? It started in Memphis. And you know what the Piggly Wiggly was? The first grocery store where you could walk up and down the aisles and take things off the shelves. Before you came into the general store and said, I need a pound of flour. And the person gathered you up the flour and gave it to you. You know, like the classic butcher shop where you go in and say, I need such and such meat, right? Rather than at Publix, right? You go in and there's chicken out there that you can grab and ground beef and steaks, etc. You just can grab, you don't have to ask anybody. So, and of course that's what another response of these stores to the changing rules is they're putting more and more things under lock and key where you have to, right, treat them like video games. Why do we treat them like video games? I guess kids who play video games steal video games. Kids don't have a lot, a 15-year-old that wants a video game isn't all that removed from a 8-year-old who wants a candy bar, right? Has anybody taken an 8-year-old or 6-year-old shopping? You have to be very careful with them because they'll just take things, they don't know, right? And just take it off the shelf. I want that. So political stability, and again, it's not necessarily that revolutions like wars aren't all that good for the economy, but it doesn't really mean that as much as it means the rules of the game don't change. What you have to do doesn't change. It doesn't matter, if all of a sudden, all these businesses have set up in New York and they make they double their state taxes on business, well, you're willing to accept higher taxes to be in New York, but maybe not that higher. And then businesses will start moving. And finally, competitive and open markets. So not only should the government not cheat, your competitors shouldn't cheat. That you can compete in the market. And that's really for us, right? If there's competition in the market, then we get something as inexpensively as it can be gotten. And open markets mean other people from outside can come in and We don't have to just buy from people in Baldwin County or Mobile County. We can import goods from Florida or Mississippi or Birmingham or New York, California. So, all right, we are going to build a model of economic growth in the, after the break. So, well, I should just shut up. You guys go have your break. Get out of here. Right, this is Thursday, right?
Yeah.
I took the trash out, it better be Thursday.